This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. Church Street United Methodist Church proudly presents Rejoice.
Well, good morning. I'm Richard Looney, one of the ministers of Church Street United Methodist Church. And I'm delighted that we can share this time together thinking about God's Word and God's will for our life. In a moment, we will be reading together from the 5th chapter of Matthew, the first 11 verses, a part of the Sermon on the Mount. But as we prepare for that, please hear the parish adult choir as they sing, "Sing unto God."
Sing, sing unto God, sing, sing, ye kingdoms of the earth. Oh, sing praises unto the Lord. Oh, sing praises unto the Lord. Sing to him that rideth upon the heavens which are of old. Lord, he uttereth his voice, and that a mighty voice, ascribing strength unto God. His excellency is over Israel, and his strength is in the stars. Sing, sing unto God, sing, sing, ye kingdoms of the earth. Oh, sing praises unto the Lord. Oh, sing praises unto the Lord. Praises unto the Lord. Praises unto the Lord. Praise the
Hear these words from the 5th chapter of Matthew, beginning with the first verse. When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up to the mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him. Then he began to speak and taught them, saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you." This is a very familiar part of the Sermon on the Mount, and it has to do with being blessed. This word blessed is difficult to translate. Sometimes it's translated happy. Sometimes it's translated simply, blessed are those. And we want to be looking today at what it is to be truly blessed. What Jesus taught goes so counter to what we usually hear and understand. And if we're not careful, we will be lost in society's norms and forget that as followers of Christ, we have a new understanding and a different set of norms. Today we will be celebrating in our worship service United Methodist Women's Day. We will be recognizing the women who work through this global organization. And I thought you might just be interested in the purpose. Is or the purpose of the United Methodist Women. The organized unit of the United Methodist Women shall be a community of women whose purpose is to know God and to experience freedom as whole persons through Jesus Christ, to develop a creative, supportive fellowship, and to expand concepts of mission through participation in the global ministries of the church. Everywhere I've served, I've been impressed with the leadership of the United Methodist Women. They not only serve local needs, but they help all of us expand our vision to know that our concern is for the world and the global church. I like to say that their purpose involves 3 S's. They do a good bit of study of Scripture, study of books and reading lists to understand what's happening in the world and to seek to discover God's will as we seek to be faithful to God's purposes. They study and they support one another. The group is made up of circles with varying interests. They meet together regularly. They have prayer and study, and they care for one another and for the larger community. And then they are dedicated not only to support, but to service. In so many wonderful ways, they serve the local church, the local community, but ultimately the world. They have always stretched our imagination to know that we are to care for God's children wherever they may be. And it's appropriate that the lectionary passage for today is concerned with the Beatitudes, this special teaching of Jesus about what it means to be in the kingdom. They help us know that we are to seek God above all else. They help us to know that we are responsible for each other, not just ourselves, and that we are responsible for the larger world. As we look at the Beatitudes, we need to stop and realize that this is countercultural. This goes against the norm and the expectation of everyday life, business life, political life, and so forth. The church is not to fade into the picture, but to always be challenging the picture. Some years ago, I read that the Museum of Natural History in New York City prepared a room to look like it would look to a dog that might walk into the room. And to this end, they had a table with legs that were like giant pillars, stretching way above the vision of the dog. They had chairs that looked like high thrones that you'd have to have help to get into. And they had a mantel that looked like a high cliff way overhead. The question was, what is the true room? Is it as it looks to a dog or as it looks to a human being? Well, we would naturally say the human being. So the question comes, is the world we live in to be seen as we see it or as God sees it, as Jesus sees it through the Beatitudes? And so we look at these from the perspective of the one who gave us life and who called us into service. First, Jesus said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." That's not the usual way we look at things. We think that the people who are aggressive, the people who are pushy, are the ones who get ahead. But Jesus said it's not so. It's those who are humble. It would be another way to translate this. It doesn't mean blessed are the poor-spirited. It means blessed are those who are poor in spirit, who are not full of pride, who are willing to be taught. As you look at the list of the major sins, the sin of pride is always the top of the list. It's pride that distorts our relationship to God. We don't really need God. We're sufficient in ourselves. It's pride that distorts our relationship to our fellow human being. We're important, they're not important. We have the truth, they don't have the truth. It's pride that makes us fail in our own successes. We think we've accomplished it. We think we've done it. And because we have all the answers, we aren't free to learn. We aren't free to relate to other people as we should. I don't know about you, but I have a very difficult time with people who are always right. I had a friend who said, I may often be wrong, but I'm never in doubt. And too many people are like that. They're never in doubt, even though they're wrong. Truth is not objective. Truth is what I wish it to be. So Jesus said, if you want to grow and mature, if you want to know God, if you want to relate to other people, you need to have an humble spirit. But we need to be careful with humility, because if we think we have humility, we probably don't. I can remember a preacher friend who always would start any discussion by saying, in the humble opinion of this preacher. And then he would speak in a way that was anything but humble. To be aware of your humility is to be aware that you really don't have it. Humility is something seen by other people. But Jesus made it clear that it's only the person who's willing to be taught, it's only the person who's willing to be led, who doesn't have all the answers, who can grow and who can be helped. And then Jesus said, blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. I doubt if many of us would place high on our list being blessed by mourning. We would really like to say, blessed are those who never shed a tear. Blessed are those who never have to grieve. And yet it's true that mourning is necessary. If you've lost a loved one, if you've lost something very special to you, you know that grief comes over you whether you wish it or not. And if we try to suppress it, if we try somehow to ignore it, it will affect our life and even destroy our health and our blessedness. We have to grieve when we've lost someone. There's an old Greek legend about a woman who's about to cross over the river Styx, S-T-Y-X, into the land of the departed. And the man who's going to ferry her across this river says that there is a portion available to you, a potion, and if you drink this, you will forget everything in the past. She said, oh, wonderful, then I will forget how I have suffered. He said, well, you will also forget how you have rejoiced. She said, I will forget all my failures. He said, yes, and you'll forget all your successes. And she said, oh, wonderful, I will forget all my sorrow. And he said, yes, and you will forget all your joy. Well, as she thought about it, she decided she didn't want that potion. She didn't want to forget her joys. She didn't want to forget the way she had loved. She didn't want to forget those successes in her life. So if we think we're going to be blessed by not having any sorrow, we're mistaken, because if we have no sorrow, then we haven't loved. And sometimes the deeper our sorrow, we realize the deeper we have loved. But there's another way in which those who mourn are blessed. They become a blessing. You all know how you used to laugh when you had a young child, and the person who knew best how to raise that child was usually an aunt who'd never had any children. And the people with all the answers didn't know what they were talking about. And sometimes when people seek to comfort us in our grief, they speak in platitudes and give little sermonettes that really aren't that helpful. I've lost a son who was 45 at his time of death. I've lost a wife 7 years ago. And it's important to grieve, but it's also important to know that what you have experienced helped you be a better person and more helpful to someone else. I've noticed that when I'm visiting with someone who's lost a child or lost a spouse, you never say, well, I understand what you've gone through. Nobody can understand what somebody else goes through. But you can simply say, well, I have some idea of what you've experienced because I too lost a child, or I too have lost my wife. The whole conversation changes. And as painful as death and loss is, it enables us to be more helpful, more pastoral to other people. Jesus said, blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. And in a strange way, we are moved closer to God, who's always with us, but somehow especially with us when we are grieving. And if in our grief we find new strength in God, then we are blessed. Then Jesus said, blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Now we have a strange view of meekness. We talk about being as meek as a mouse or as meek as a lamb, and we talk about weakness or smallness. But the word meekness here is hard to translate. It doesn't really mean weak. It means being molded or being trained. It would be a word used to describe a horse that's been broken and is now under the care of the master who can obey orders. So a meek person is not somebody who's lost all of personality and all strength, but it describes a person who is under the care of God, who's molded by God. Jesus described himself as meek. Well, he was not weak. He seemed to be in charge even when those who were dedicated to taking his life thought they were in charge. Paul was described as meek, and this fiery preacher who stood up to people wherever he was not weak. So what we're looking for here is people who are under control, people who are under the control of God. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. One of the joys of my life has been to visit New Zealand. And they say there that there are more sheep than people. So in a sense, this little lamb is inheriting the earth. But it means so much more than that. Those who bluster, those who push ahead, will eventually be resisted. And those who are God-trained, those who move in the Spirit of Christ, will be able to make a difference in the world and in life. And then Jesus said, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. You know, I've always been blessed with a good appetite, too much so sometimes. Some people, when they get sick, lose their appetite. I tend to gain more appetite. And appetite is a wonderful gift. You enjoy food more. You grow if you eat well. And loss of appetite is a sign of poor health and maybe even approaching death. But we have different appetites than our physical appetites. We have a spiritual appetite as well. And sometimes people say, you know, the church doesn't speak to me like it used to. Well, is this the church's fault or is it your fault? Maybe there's something wrong with your spiritual appetite. I can remember a little woman in one of my churches who used to complain because we didn't sing like they used to sing. Well, I thought we were singing magnificently, and I watched her one Sunday, and I noticed that when we announced a hymn, she would open her book, look at it, slam the book, and hold it under her arm and stand there defiantly like nobody's going to make me sing that hymn. Well, of course we didn't sing like we used to because she didn't sing. And sometimes we blame the preacher, or we blame the church or the choir for our own lack of appetite, our own desire for that which is spiritual and godly. So Jesus would urge us to have a good appetite. Nobody could cook quite like my mother. because nobody fed me when I was as hungry as I was as a teenage boy. And maybe when we live in the past and remember the good old days, maybe that's more a commentary on our spiritual health than it is on the church. Then Jesus said, "Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy." Jesus gave us a telling parable about a man who forgave a tremendous debt, and then the fellow who was forgiven the debt went right out and had somebody who owed him a small debt thrown in prison. And he said, lock him up, because he has received mercy but will not extend mercy. And the way to receive mercy is to realize how much we need it and how much we have received. And if we're willing to forgive, unwilling to forgive, we may be unwilling to receive forgiveness. So when you extend mercy, you receive mercy. So give people the benefit of the doubt. Don't be harsh and judgmental, but extend mercy. And then Jesus said, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God." Who of us would claim to be pure in heart? Here again, the word is difficult to translate. It has more to do with being focused. Do not be double-minded, we're told. And it has more to do with loving God with all our heart, loving our neighbor, and loving ourselves. It has to do with the focus of our life, not the purity of our heart. Obviously, with God's help, we want to be pure. But more than anything else, we will need to be focused on God, who is our strength and our help. So blessed are those who are not double-minded. Blessed are those who have a single mind to pleasing God and reflecting God in their life, and so forth. And then Jesus said, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the children of God." Don't we all yearn for peace? Our world is so full of violence, so full of hatred. We are so divided, even in this great country. We are so ideologically divided that we have difficulty listening to one another, and therefore we can't work together. What if we could be peacemakers? One of my favorite stories is about the soldier who had a nagging wife, and she was always nagging him through the mail. And finally he sent a letter and he said, "Would you leave me alone and let me fight this war in peace?" What a strange way to express it. Fight the war in peace. Well, some of us are so torn with internal conflict between our best selves and our worst selves, between God's will and our will, that we need to find our way to be at peace with ourselves, with our neighbor, and with God. And finally, Jesus said, "Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for they will inherit the kingdom of heaven." And then he said, "You are blessed when people revile you and persecute you and say all manner of things against you falsely, for so they treated the prophets, and so they treat me." It's important to notice that he said, "Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake." Sometimes we're persecuted because we're obnoxious. Sometimes we're persecuted because we're bullheaded. Sometimes we're persecuted because we're self-centered. But if we are persecuted for righteousness' sake, we will make a difference in the world and in our own life. Well, this is a lot to try to comprehend, isn't it? These 8 Beatitudes, these tests for blessedness and happiness. I invite you to think about them and try to apply them in your own life. And think about them now as our parish youth choir sings, "Sing unto the Lord a new song," and may God put a new song in your heart, and may God bless you as you seek to follow these special Beatitudes.
People and tongues of every nation, sing to the Lord a new
Thank you for sharing in this time of worship today. I would hope you know that you would be welcome at any of our worship services on Sunday morning at 8:30 and at 11, and on Wednesday at noon in the chapel. Let me give you also a special invitation to the Master Art Series this Sunday afternoon at 2:30. There will be a free concert by Daniel Webb, baritone, and Dr. Christy Lee on the piano. You will find this to be an inspiring and wonderful time, and we hope the whole community will be free to join us for this time of celebrating great music and remembering God, who is a giver of all good gifts. God bless you. Have a special day and a good week.
Members and friends of Church Street United Methodist Church, your downtown church at the corner of Henley and Main, would like to thank you for joining Rejoice. Please send us your comments and suggestions, and be sure to tune in next Sunday at this same time for Rejoice.